Although armed conflict had been occurring across the globe for much of the 1930s in places such as Manchuria, Ethiopia, and Spain, Germany's invasion of Poland on the 1st of September 1939 is generally accepted as the beginning of World War II. The United States, of course, did not become an active combatant until December 7, 1941, after the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor. However, during the 2-year period between those events, it became rather obvious which side America favored. Films, comic books, and other media examples of premature anti-fascist sentiments in the pre-Pearl Harbor period were not officially encouraged by the United States government, which maintained a neutral stance, albeit one with a distinct anti-Axis flavor. This didn't deter many publishers. Unlike Hollywood films, American comic books weren't widely exported overseas. The covers of nearly 200 comic books published in the 1939-1941 period clearly reflect an awareness of the world conflict and demonstrate a distinct anti-Axis bias. This began rather subtly and became more blatant as time went on. By the actual declaration of war by the United States in December 1941, comic books had been openly portraying Nazis as villains for months, and in the case of some publishers, for more than a year. Virtually all the pre-Pearl Harbor references to World War II on the covers of American comic books were directed at Nazi Germany. Neither Japan nor Italy were addressed on any significant number of comic book covers in this period. Interestingly enough, several covers drawn during the era of the Nazi-Soviet Pact, which was in force between August 1939 and June 1941, do depict Hitler and the Nazis in league with Stalin and the Soviet Union. The Eurocentric bias of the United States accounts for much of this focus on the Nazis. American public opinion generally sympathized with the Chinese in their battle against the Japanese invaders, and Italy's attack on Ethiopia and participation in the Spanish Civil War on the side of the nationalists were frowned upon, but neither Japan nor Italy was generally perceived as a direct threat to the United States, so the Nazis bore the brunt of comic book cover opprobrium in the 1939 to 1941 period. It should be kept in mind that comic books took several months to write, draw, print, and distribute, and the cover dates were generally several months ahead of the actual newsstand date. Thus, comic book content lagged 3 to 4 months behind the cover date. For instance, a comic book cover quickly drawn in response to the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor in December 1941 would have probably appeared on a comic sold no sooner than mid-February, with a cover date of April 1942. A comic book cover, like a propaganda poster or movie advertisement, uses visual symbols, codes, signs, stereotypes, and other imagery, as well as words, to convey its message. For example, comic book covers in late 1939, 1940, and 1941 used symbols and codes such as the image of Adolf Hitler himself, the swastika, the distinctive German Army coal scuttle helmet, the Stuka dive bomber, and U-boats to signify Germany and Nazis to comic book readers. The symbol most closely associated with the Nazis is the swastika. However, before 1941, when the United States was still officially neutral, the swastika was occasionally replaced by cryptic runes, or significantly, a skull and crossbones, to symbolize the sinister, bloodthirsty nature of the Nazi regime, linking it visually with the concept of death and destruction. The earliest comic book we have found featuring swastikas on the cover was Top Notch No. 2, dated January 1940, which means it was probably for sale in November 1939 and was thus drawn shortly after the Nazi invasion of Poland in September of that year. The use of runes, symbols, and the skull and crossbones motif continued throughout 1940 and 1941, but comic book publishers became increasingly willing to identify Nazi Germany as the cause of misery and bloodshed in Europe, and swastikas became quite common on comic book covers even before the United States officially declared war on Germany. Germany's Stuka dive bomber, with its distinctive gull wings and fixed spatted landing gear, gained international fame during the Nazi invasion of Poland in September 1939, and later during the Blitzkrieg through France and the Low Countries in 1940. The cover of Popular Comics number 46, dated December 1939, and thus probably available for purchase in October, features a clearly recognizable Stuka marked with a skull and crossbones. On the cover of All American Comics number 18, September 1940, an unmarked dive bomber attacks some futuristic buildings as Green Lantern tries to intervene. Contemporary readers would have readily recognized both the aircraft and its target. Although unmarked and painted bright orange, hardly the most warlike of colors, the airplane is obviously a German Stuka dive bomber. The round building is the perisphere and the pointed spire is the trilon, landmark buildings of the 1939-1940 World's Fair, located in Flushing Meadows, New York. Thus, as early as summer 1940, Nazi Germany is specifically identified as a military threat to the continental United States. U-boats, like Stukas, were symbols of the German war machine. Indeed, unrestricted submarine warfare during the First World War had helped precipitate the entry of the United States into the conflict on the side of the Allies. U-boats appeared on more than 10% of the war-oriented comic book covers in the pre-1942 period. Marvel Mystery Comics number 4 had a cover date of February 1940, meaning it was published in late 1939 in the first months of World War II. Aquatic superhero the Submariner attacks a Nazi U-boat, which not only sports a swastika flag, but also a gigantic skull and crossbones image on the conning tower, along with the words Death Raider in English. The sub threatens a warship that appears to be flying a French flag. Also, somehow the sinister German sailors have captured a young woman and tied her to the gun mount on the deck of their vessel. Submariner Comics number 2, summer 1941, shows the Submariner arriving too late to save a British ship, but he decides to avenge it by ramming a torpedo down the Nazi sub's hatch. The Black Owl was more successful in preventing a U-boat from sinking a clearly marked Red Cross hospital ship, indicating how ruthless the Nazis were, as seen on the cover of Prize Comics number 17, dated December 1941. The most frequently depicted real-life character on the covers of wartime comics and in other media as well was Adolf Hitler, leader of Nazi Germany. Perhaps the earliest image of Hitler on the cover of a comic book was Captain America number 1, dated March 1941. Here we see the German dictator in his swastika-bedecked lair plotting sabotage against U.S. munitions works until Captain America bursts in and punches him. Daredevil battles Hitler with a cover date of July 1941 was the first issue of the Daredevil comic book series and has a rare hybrid cover with a photograph of Hitler, dubbed the Mad Merchant of Hate, combined with drawn artwork. Another interesting Hitler cover is Fantastic Comics number 22, dated September 1941. In the background, a U-boat can be seen, clearly labeled with a swastika, just in case the identity of the dictator was in doubt. In the foreground, superhero Samson, a biblically inspired character, bursts through a giant model head of Hitler, which seems to contain, Moloch-like, a fiery oven into which a young woman is being fed. Samson's sidekick David, another biblical reference, raises the American flag as Hitler and several henchmen take aim at Samson with their pistols. The same publishing company produced Silver Streak Comics number 16, dated November 1941, which features a green-faced Hitler, somewhat resembling an evil George Clooney, and his henchmen preparing a horrible death for the hero's sidekick. Adolf Hitler would go on to appear on well over 100 comic book covers in the 1942-45 period. The comic book industry took an early anti-Axis stance, responding to the Nazi invasion of Poland in September 1939 with numerous covers showing Nazi villains and German armed forces attacking countries, including the United States, threatening innocent people and committing atrocities. These comic books not only reflected American attitudes about world conflict, they may have also played a part in forming or reinforcing these attitudes through the repetitive use of motifs, codes, and symbols. When war finally came to the United States in December 1941, comic books were already poised to fully participate in the war effort. And that will be the focus of future episodes.